So welcome back, everyone. I know it was a short break, but the program is really dense today because of an afternoon activity after the fourth session of this dialogue, which is going to be about one of the main terms in the title of this event, ethics, the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. And I'm going to pass on the baton to Geshe Sangpo, who is going to facilitate this session as member of the planning committee. The floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the second sessions of the second day. The topic diversity and ethics. And my name is Geshe Sambo. I'm from Gandhin Chanzi Monastery, and it is my pleasure to serve as a moderator of this session. And our panel speakers will explore some of the ethical issues that surround the current and future of the AI system. And how can we approach the questions of how to live well together in age of artificial intelligence system? As Geshe Jimbala mentioned, with great knowledge and power comes equal amount of responsibility. In this session, our speakers will explore questions such as Sasha Luccioni, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, from Hugging Face will address questions like what are the environmental impacts of AI and how can the different pillars of sustainable development be addressed in this work. Then we have Marvik Hickok from Center for AI and Digital Policy. Will explain some of the adverse implications of AI system on societal and on individuals' dignity and fundamental rights and future chances for flourishing. And how might such implication be thought through ethically? And then we have Yasin Gabriel from Google DeepMind will ask how can we choose ethical principles for AI that respects the fact we live in a pluralistic world, and how can we find better ways to live together in this era of advanced technology. Then finally, we have Geshe Thabgela from Sera Monastery will explore how the approach of secular ethics put forth by His Holiness 14th Dalai Lama could be potentially be useful with respect to the unfolding of artificial intelligence system. So for this session, we will hear from each of our great speakers, and after that, we will have a 10-minute breaks and then panel discussion followed by Q&A session by the audience. And floor is yours, Sasha. Please.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch, and welcome to everyone on the live stream as well. If I can have my slides, please. So 6 years ago, I was working in finance, and I had what I call my quarter-life crisis, and I quit my job and dedicated my life to making AI more sustainable. And in these last 6 years, I've been thinking about what sustainability really means. And so today I'll share that vision with you. I called it AI Compass because I do feel it is somewhat of a guiding North Star towards a long road ahead, let's say. It's interesting when we think about sustainable development now, sustainability, we tend to focus on the environmental impacts, but actually one of the proposed definitions in the 1980s by the economist Edward Barbier, he proposed 3 interconnected pillars. So environmental stewardship was definitely one of them, but there was social equity and also, interestingly, economic viability. And he said that without all 3, you can't have truly sustainable development. And so the 3 need to overlap because something that's just environmentally friendly but not economically viable can never be sustainable in the long run in the sense of surviving over time. Something that is, for example, economically viable but that amplifies social inequities, also unsustainable over time. And so this is really the 3 pillars I want to explore in my talk. So let's start with environmental sustainability. As probably you all know, AI is putting a great strain on our planet, on the resources of our planet. The energy demand of data centers that include AI, not only limited to AI, is currently about 2% of energy of electricity around the world. It's projected to double by next year. using more energy than the whole of Japan just for data centers. Water is increasingly hard to get. It has to be fresh water for cooling data centers because of the way that the systems are made. And so it's putting stress on already threatened aquifers. We know that water is a precious resource. We know that many, many regions don't have access to it. And of course, this is only getting worse with the water needed for data center cooling. Rare earth minerals are needed to produce the hardware. All of the smartphones, GPUs, CPUs, laptops, self-driving cars, what have you, need a lot of precious minerals, and they're mined in very unsustainable ways. You need to move tons and tons of earth just to get a single gram of many of these minerals, and they're mined in conflict areas, often by children. And so environmental sustainability is definitely lacking. Most of the research I do have been doing in the last years has been around this. So, for example, papers like power-hungry processing. I actually have a thing. I've always put puns in all of my articles. So, what's driving the cost of AI deployment? We evaluated the impacts of environment in terms of deploying AI models, but I also look at the broader life cycle, because typically in life cycle assessment, like whether you're looking at a pair of jeans or a car or what have you, you look at the life cycle, not only the usage, but how the object was made, how long it's used for, how many usages you can get out of it, et cetera, even the end of life, for example. It's an interesting question. What does end of life mean for AI? But in general, we try to look at above and beyond just the usage and over the whole life cycle of AI. And so, for example, this is from a paper of mine from a couple of years ago. We found that just for a single large language model, and this is a small large language model by today's standards, so it was 176 billion parameters. Now, DeepSeek, for example, the recent DeepSeek model was 800 billion parameters, so it's a small large language model. Just that training emitted 50 tons of CO2 emissions when you look at the entire life cycle, including the hardware, but also the manufacturing of the equipment, and also the idle consumption, because there's actually a lot of, you need to sustain the internet, the storage, and all of that. So when it all adds up, it is quite large numbers, and this is one single LLM in one single case. 3 years ago, actually, the study came out. So this is really ballooning. So this is the environmental angle. Now, in terms of social sustainability, there's some really interesting societal rebound effects. When you make some changes, you create some new technologies, and they have these, it's like dropping a pebble in water, it has these ripple effects, rebound effects. So for example, we can say that, yes, we are making savings in resource use. AI is getting more efficient. But on the other hand, the way in which we're using AI is often very consumeristic, let's say. So for example, targeted advertising is one of the main sources of revenue for technology companies like Amazon, for example. And essentially, yes, nowadays, every time you make a web search or you search for a product on Amazon, there's a real-time AI model that's going to suggest new things for you. And these models are getting better and better. Sometimes people are like, my phone is spying on me. No, it's not spying on you. You're just so predictable. We're so predictable. And it's gathering more and more of our data. And it doesn't mean it's listening to us, but it's just getting all of our clicks and our searches and all of that and puts it together, and it's getting so good. So for example, a third of its annual sales, of Amazon's annual sales, are generated by this AI product recommendation tool. So it's actually a huge source of consumption, of unsustainability, and yet this is something that we rarely think about because we're often so focused on LLMs and chatbots. So it's really interesting. These models are getting good, they're getting efficient, and they're having these ripple effects. Another effect that I like thinking about is dematerialization. So for example, AI systems have mostly, at this point, replaced dictionaries, maps, and recipe books. Like the other day, I was in the car with my daughters, and then I was like, back in the day, we had paper maps. And they were like, you guys were pirates? Like they haven't seen a paper map in their life. And so we can think that this is sustainable, right? Because instead of having 12 maps for your state or for your province, you have a single phone that you always use. But we have less objects, essentially. But what happens, sorry, seems to be stuck a little bit. But what happens to all of the other impacts that this has? Can you advance it? It seems to be a little stuck. Oh, there you go. So yeah, so essentially you can use your phone to navigate. You can use ChatGPT to generate a recipe. Nowadays, like especially when I talk to younger generations, they say they don't even have recipe books. They'll either ChatGPT it or Google it, have it generated on the fly based on what they have in their fridge. So we can think that we have less objects, we have less, material impacts, but what is the cost to the environment and to human knowledge? It's really interesting, right? Like, of Of course, no one remembers any phone numbers anymore. That's already a given. But now we don't even have recipes in our minds. We don't even know how to get from point A to point B in our own cities without using our phones. And so we have these ripple effects, and then we have these data centers that are growing far away from us, and so we don't see the impacts on the environment because we can't. It's very hard for us as human beings to make a connection between a search or a query and a data center that's popping up in Virginia or Texas, for example. And so these societal rebound effects are getting more and more significant. And in terms of economic sustainability, I think this is a major question, increasingly so. Economy-wide rebound effects essentially happens when a single innovation, so for example, the telephone or electricity, provokes far-reaching changes in the economy. And it's been proposed that certain types of AI models, so GPT AI models, have the potential to impact the entire economy. And there's this really interesting paper that is very confusing. It's called GPTs or GPTs. And it's essentially GPTs like ChatGPT are general purpose technologies. And they use these two terms interchangeably in the whole article, and everyone gets very confused. But in the end, they say that accountants, journalists, administrative assistants, policy analysts are all going to disappear within the next couple of years because of AI models, like GPT models. And it's interesting because it's a whole scientific paper, and essentially the thing is, it's coming, it's inevitable, as the last panel said, but what's less clear is how they evaluate this, because essentially they use an AI model, they use a GPT model to make these predictions in the first place. So it's very circular when you think about it. It's AI models predicting that AI models will replace people, and the agency of people is kind of lost in this process. And about evaluation, it's really important. I mean, this could be a whole separate talk, but just there's no single way of evaluating large language models. And people often use very arbitrary ways of doing so. And my favorite one is from a paper that's called Sparks of AGI, Sparks of Artificial General Intelligence. And they provide all this evidence that GPT, I think 3.5, has these sparks of artificial general intelligence. And one of the evidence that they provide is that it can draw a unicorn. And this is the unicorn that it draws. And this is legitimately a piece of evidence that's provided to say, hey, this thing is so smart, it's going to take over whole professions because it can draw a unicorn. And so this is like the juxtaposition that we have, that on one hand we have, it's coming, it's taking over, we're all doomed. And on the other hand, it's like, please draw a unicorn, draw me a sheep, right? And then my favorite example of this kind of lack of logic is comparing humans and AI with terms of carbon footprint. And there's a paper that came out in a very legitimate review last year that said that AI writing produces 130 to 1,500 times less CO2 than human authors. And the way they did this is they took my work. That small bar is Bloom. This is the paper that I shared with you a couple of slides ago. And they compared it to the carbon footprint of an average person from India and an average person from the US, and the time it takes for a human author to write a page of text. And they said, okay, well, it takes on average, 3 hours. And so they divided the carbon footprint by the number of hours in a year. And they said, well, so for example, in the US, it would be 1,000 grams of carbon. In India, it would be 100 grams of carbon. And an AI model is 0.1 grams of carbon. So actually, AI is more sustainable because we can just replace all the human authors with large language model. And this, for me, is so symptomatic of the way that we are evaluating these systems, because of course it doesn't make sense, because you're completely discounting of how these models were trained, what the data was, who generated the data that was used to train these language models, human authors, right? And there's like a footnote in the paper that I find quite iconic that said, emissions analyses do not account for social impacts such as professional displacement, legality, and rebound effects. So essentially, they honed in on a single data point from my work, which is really what irks me most. They took my research and they completely misconstrued it to make almost a eugenics argument saying that we should replace all humans by AI. And so, as a conclusion to all of these quite unsustainable practices, I think that we should be looking beyond environmental sustainability. And it's made me question my own work over the last 6 years, because I've been really focused on carbon footprint, on energy, on all of these quantifiable things. But now I realize more and more that we have to contextualize them in society and economy. And I think that as a community, as the last panel mentioned, we can still reflect and reimagine, especially the relationship between technologies like AI, business objectives, which we can't ignore, and ecological imperatives. And it's finding that it's a tension, of course, and it's a trade-off, but we can't just say, we're going to make money, the planet be damned, or we're going to save the planet, money be damned, as much as I'd like to say that. We have to still think about how the two can coexist, and the three pillars can coexist. And I think that more and more we need interdisciplinary approaches that link AI development to broader impacts. So, for example, when I spoke to my environmental friends about this, the study that compared humans to AI, they were like, this makes no sense. You can't just compare this thing and this other thing in the context of a single factor. And so I think that we all agree that the climate crisis is real, and we have to be honest and proactive how either AI can stay a part of the problem or become a part of the solution. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you. And next presenter, Marve, please. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'll try to follow up on that presentation. My name is Mary Haycock. I'm the president and policy director of Center for AI and Digital Policy, and I'm also the founder of AIethicist.org. At the center, our mission is to protect and advance AI policies in a way, shape AI policies in a way that protects human rights, human dignity, democratic values, and rule of law. All of those concepts under serious attack for one way or another right now. And we do this by advising national governments and international organizations, as well as building capacity in different countries on who should be at the table to discuss these issues and help shape the conversations. So I want to we talked a lot about, over the last couple of days, we talked a lot about large language models, some of the earliest impacts of social media, how that changed over time. But I also want to make sure that we don't lose sight of another algorithmic system, predictive AI systems. I will still touch on generative AI systems, but I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. And I want to do that at both horizontal and vertical levels. So when I say we're all interconnected, that is not revolutionary idea, right? Especially for this room, that is the starting point that is granted. But I want to explain this with the outcomes of algorithmic systems. So we use AI systems. Sometimes we choose to use AI systems, such as social media, large language models, etc., for different purposes. And we've been discussing the issues, although our panel is called the Ethics Panel. I think all of the panels throughout this week actually talk about ethics and the implications. So we heard a lot different angles about this. But there are also AI systems that are used upon us, that are making decisions about us, that impact and sometimes undermine our human dignity, our fundamental rights, the way that we access resources and opportunities. And these AI systems are built on historical data, right? You collect historical data about engagements, posts, voting, whatever it is, consumption. And then you assume, or the developers assume, that past behavior is going to always predict future behavior. And if only we have enough data, that we can predict all of these social outcomes. And the second assumption is that mathematically we can quantify, we can reduce the complexity of humans into quantifiable data points. But we can't, right? Humans are complex, humans are diverse. Although these systems, predictive AI systems or generative AI systems even, are I would say static in a sense that they tie us to the past, right? You're not able to move beyond their boundaries. AI systems do not forget, they do not forgive, they do not tolerate. Whereas us humans, we change, we aspire, we dream, we grow, we learn, right? So there is this dilemma between us as humans and the systems that make decisions about us and the way that we practice our rights and access to resources. And these systems are used in very critical domains such as recruitments, who gets a job, who gets healthcare, who gets a credit. They are used by who gets education even. They are used by law enforcement authorities, police, immigration authorities, even courts, how much time you should spend. Are you guilty? Are you about to commit a crime before you even commit? So there are so many ways that these systems can undermine human rights and human dignity and even due process in the meantime. But I want to make sure that we remember that there are humans and there are organizations behind these systems. AI does not fall from the sky. It does not come out of the blue. Humans make decisions about the data that we use, about the models that we develop, where we develop these systems, and who should be responsible for the consequences, right? And this means that when there are adverse impacts from these AI systems, whether predictive AI systems or generative AI systems, that has an impact on not only the individual, but horizontally an individual's family, community, network of individuals around them, and ultimately the fabric of society. And let me explain how that can vertically get even worse in what we call cumulative disadvantage. It is a term used by Oscar Gandhi Jr. And I'll explain this with real examples of algorithms, right? Imagine that you have a serious health condition. You go to the hospital algorithm deprioritizes you despite your physical condition because it's using past or historical bias and structurally biased data. This has happened. It deprioritized Black patients despite their significant or serious conditions. And then the insurance, your condition gets worse because you're deprioritized, you don't have access or you have late access to health. Your insurance algorithm just says, okay, the condition is now worse. I'm going to deny coverage to you because at this point it's not beneficial to me. It's not profitable to me. So you start using your own savings, your money, whatever it is, and then you start paying from out of your pocket. And now we have, at least in the US and in some of the European countries and beyond, we have what we call algorithmic credit score, right? It is a score, algorithmic score, a statistical model that says how much of a financial risk you are and whether a loan should be given to you. So your credit score starts to decrease. As you're dealing with your paying from out of pocket and your condition gets worse, etc., you go to a bank to get more resources, access to more resources and a loan. Bank denies your loan because of your now low credit score. We said, okay, what are other ways that I can reduce expenses at least, and you decide to apply for a cheaper house, a cheaper rental place, right? Now, the tenant screening algorithm that has access to not only your credit score, your health, your social media posts, your communications, etc., denies your application to rent a house. And let's say, okay, at this point, I will work, no matter what, I will work more. Let me find a job that might be helpful. Now, the companies, pretty much across all around, across the board, are using algorithmic systems to make determinations about who gets hired. And now, let's say you're denied to health, so you are denied a job, the different job, because of your health or your credit score. So you can see how this can, on a vertical level, on a single individual level, can also create significant cumulative disadvantages and multiply that by their networks, their families, their neighborhoods, etc. But despite that, we continue to push for more AI in everything, and I am really thankful to the previous panel because each one of them had a great segue, a great explanation, a more in-depth explanation of some of these concepts that I'm talking about. So right now there is this the narrative that was mentioned in the previous panel about an AI race, right? There is this ultimate goal of an advanced AI model, however we define it. Who gets there first is going to be the winner. And if we don't do it, someone else is going to be doing it. So put all the resources, money, data, etc., energy into the systems, into this race, so we can get there first. But race means winner takes all, right? It is a zero-sum game, where I would like to propose an alternative model, an alternative narrative called RAISE. And I do realize that for English as a second language speakers, that might be confusing the way that I am as a non-native speaker of English, that pronunciation might be confusing. But I use RAISE as a way to enhance, elevate, improve, raise the bar for everyone, right, for well-being and nourishing of everyone. And I want to take a second of what that different scenario looks like when you shift the narrative from race to race. Race means domination. You're trying to dominate the resources, access to possibilities, right? Instead of collaboration. Race might amplify and deepen digital divides or even digital canyon, as a former UNESCO director mentioned, instead of including people, you are going there at the expense of everyone else, creating a deeper haves or have-nots. Race means usually goes hand in hand, and the final objective is usually power, whoever gets more power, whereas our ultimate objective should be compassion, and how do we improve human condition, human well-being, etc. Race usually enables mass surveillance and exploitation, whereas we can choose to enhance human dignity and work towards that goal, right, instead of undermining that. Race can create cumulative disadvantages, and usually for the same groups, instead of shared benefits and maybe some burdens for all of us. And then race, again, goes hand in hand with control and militarization. The more that you have these powerful companies and powerful governments working together in this race, you see more resources going into technologies of control, and AI and algorithmic systems embedded into militarization, whereas we want more improved democratic values and we want to improve inclusion. So there are two ways to tackle this. One is a very reactive way, and the other one is a more proactive way. And the reactive way is when corporations and governments deploy an AI system, the real objectives behind those are not really clear, at least to the public, right? The decision makers have the objectives, but they're not clear to us. And there's usually a misaligned incentives and values between those deployed and those that are impacted, right? There's a misaligned incentive between public interests. So you usually see, whether it's the government or the companies that are deploying these, big companies that are deploying this, that it's more about power, profit, control, efficiency, getting more out of less resources. And what we do in a reactive way is put some governance structures around this, whether it's through legislation, regulation, voluntary mechanisms, etc., to kind of reduce the risks, demand that they mitigate the risks, and if they cannot mitigate risk and harms still happen, that we are clear about who's responsible, liable, or accountable. And we've done this in like the likes of pharmaceuticals, medicine, energy, food safety, transportation safety, etc. The other way is to have an open society where the communities decide on the need and the priority of if we should deploy algorithmic systems and how we should deploy algorithmic systems, and start with enhancing, like have this vision of public interest at heart, and creating the structures, the values, the incentives around that with an open society and open debate. And it starts with do no harm first, right? And then the second is imagining a future that these communities want to be in, and then backtracing that to what kind of resources, capacity building, policies, etc., that we should have in place to get to that future. And we see this, possibly see the examples in open source software and early days of internet, like how internet was visualized earlier. I want to leave us with 4 summary points from this presentation. And one is, it is not only generative AI systems that we should be thinking about. The predictive AI systems are just as important in terms of their impact on communities and our dignity. Second one is there are humans behind every decisions, and we should think about these in terms of human decisions, institutional decisions. The third is, this has been said multiple times about the inevitability. Nothing is inevitable, and we can change the trajectory of, that the technologies might still be used, but we can certainly change the trajectory of what we want those technologies to do. And then finally, it is about our collective action, the way that we collectively respond to change this trajectory that prioritize not only public interest, human dignity, but the way that we respect each other's humanity. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you here today. My name is Yason Gabriel, and I'm a philosopher, an ethicist, and researcher at the AI company Google DeepMind. And today I will be talking about AI and human values, and I'm ready for my presentation. Thank you. So the question I want to ask is how can we live together well and continue to live together well in the age of advanced technologies, which include artificial intelligence? And following on from the wonderful talk from Merve, I think the starting point is to note that artificial intelligence, or the families of technologies that we gather under this label, are already having a profound effect on many people's lives. So this can be seen in the field of healthcare or mortgage lending, which I would say is the institutional level that Merve spoke so eloquently about. Moving forwards, people have noted that increasingly language models are being paired with tools so that AI systems can take actions in the world, and they think that that could be a consequential moment. And we also heard yesterday that people are already entering perceived relationships with artificial intelligence that they attribute various qualities to. There's stories about people falling in love with AI. And these are clearly consequential interfaces that we need to attend to very, very carefully as they have such a wide impact on many of our lives. And so, what I would suggest is that because of this wide and pervasive impact, the values that are embedded in these systems really matter. And I think we can see that just by referring to the technologies just discussed. So, it's very important that healthcare algorithms treat different cases fairly, and we may want to have a discussion about what that entails. If we think about artificial agents, it's very important that we understand whether they are following instructions or we set boundaries on what they can and cannot do. And so artificial intelligence is really a value-rich technology, I'd say, and one where there isn't a kind of natural default where we can just leave it alone. Actually, the decisions are coming to us quite quickly. And beyond that, I'd also like to stress a few further things. So I think when a technology has a profound effect on people's lives, a lot of the other speakers have already said that there's no exit or we're being imposed upon. I think there's some truth in that. And the important answer there is when there's interference of this kind, it actually gives you a right to have some measure of control over the system that's influencing you. So we think of that in the context of the state and governments. We all have an important say in how collective decisions are made. And I think we can also apply that framework to powerful technologies quite meaningfully. Many of these choices are here in front of us now. And I think more often than not, they're choices that are best made together. So sometimes people think, we can all just have our own personal AI reflecting our values. But really, these are global technologies, if you think about chatbots or algorithms. And it's often much better to have a common conversation where we try to figure out what the path ahead is. Of course, at this point, we encounter an important challenge, which is that people actually disagree quite profoundly about values, right? So they disagree about what a good life looks like. Some people are religious, some people are not religious. Even in the non-religious world, as you can see in politics, people really deeply disagree about what it means to live well together. And so that presents a problem for AI, right? If we want to come up with a common direction in which to steer the technology. So I want to ask, what can be done here? And I think there are some really important insights, many of which thankfully mesh with the ideas that are found in the secular version of Buddhist ethics and Buddhist ethics more widely. So I think the first kind of bridge we can try and build focuses on identifying pre-existing consensus. So we might ask, is there an overlap between these different value systems, even though they appear different? And there I would suggest the answer is yes, and it starts with the notion that human life is valuable, but it's also quite fragile. We can be harmed, and we all have a potential to flourish, right? So you might think as a base level principle, we want to include some notion of rights that AI systems must respect, that put these guardrails in place. But very quickly, we'll encounter new kinds of questions about AI that we're not well positioned to answer. For example, this question about AI and human relationships, and we will need to kind of evolve our discussion. So the second thing I would suggest is that we could have a democratic discourse or conversation or even vote on these things. And I believe Merve was gesturing in that direction when she spoke about community dialogues. And the idea here would ideally be that everyone affected by a decision would have an opportunity to express their opinion in their own voice. Because as I believe Emily M. Bender said earlier, everyone has expertise that's relevant here, and everyone has value beliefs that are relevant here. But of course, the challenge there is that it's very hard to have this conversation with 1 billion or 2 billion people, right? And it's unfortunately not possible to have conversations with everyone who's affected. So we can't converse with animals. And there's many people who are not even born, right? But they will all be affected by what humanity does with technology at this juncture. So the third proposed approach I'd like to discuss involves essentially using moral imagination to try and understand what a more universal, compassionate approach would look like. So one question we can ask ourselves about different kinds of artificial intelligence is, if you didn't know who you would be, whether you would be rich or poor, whether you would be, born in Southeast Asia or America, if you just kind of close your eyes and think a minute, is there anything that you would still like to choose for everyone, that doesn't seem to rest on any, specific attachment that you may have? And I think that actually quite a lot can be discovered from this vantage point. So the first thing I'd suggest is that we all need to take AI safety very seriously, right? No one benefits from a recklessly developed or deployed technology. And so safety is a really, really strong kind of common cause in this area. Moving beyond that, I think that we all have a huge collective interest in remaining in control of the technology and understanding how it works, right? So people are interested in autonomous systems, but no one wants really autonomous systems where they kind of take the agency away from us. And then moving beyond risk, I think there's also the question about how these benefits, if they arrive, are going to be shared. So, there's a lot of interest in using AI for scientific discovery. And there's also a potential to use it to perform a range of economically valuable tasks. But if you didn't know who you were or where you would be placed in the world, I think we would all have a common interest in ensuring a widespread benefit, right? And given the state of the world, the material inequality, it's a real challenge to kind of fulfill that promise of widely beneficial technology. But I think that this kind of reflection can give us a kind of North Star or an orientation with which to tackle some of these important questions. So my final slide essentially emphasizes this idea that we must continue to learn to live together as the technologies at our disposal become more complicated and potentially more powerful. And if we follow the reflections of a philosopher called Hans Jonas, who's a philosopher who I rate quite highly, he says that in this new age, our sense of responsibility must become more expansive. So he says we should try and act in ways that are compatible with the permanence of genuine human life and that are not destructive of the future possibility of such life. So we need to think about everyone affected, and we also need to think about the longer time horizon over which our actions will have consequences. And my belief is by using these kind of reflective modes of engagement, but also real-world institutions, democratic discourses, we can actually become more wise, and we can make better decisions about the standards to which to hold technologies and technologists and our own governments when it comes to making decisions that affect all of us. And ultimately, the aspiration is to make wise choices throughout the process. So these are my reflections, and I'll be very happy to discuss them further with you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much. And my name is Tauke. I am from Serache Monastery. So I grew up watching Minor Life dialogues and a long time, and I have been participating in Minor Life since 2009. So although sometimes very hard to catch, they're gigantic. The English is sometimes very too hard. Anyway, so it's to be very, very honored thankful to be here with you today. So the Okay, can you have my? Okay. Yeah. The question today I'm going to explore is basically you already, most of them is already discussed, which is really is can we combine to the ethical value, especially to the circular ethics and His Holiness wishes, with the development of AI in technologies. And I would like to begin quote with His Holiness. We can combine our brain with our heart. Intelligence alone is not enough. Compassion must be guided. So I think this is a very much all my talks. So in also the traditional Buddhists, we are always talk about to the wisdom and the compassion must be together, and especially if you truly to cultivating to the compassion and the wisdom ultimately come up, and the vice versa to wisdom too. So I think it's the okay. No, sorry, go a little back. Go. Yeah. So and this morning and other times I've heard about the AI is becoming sort of like Professor Luke mentioned about sort of new God, which is knows everything and they do many things like some of our colleague mentioned. So it's maybe not now, but many experts believe there's even more, the kind of like capable, the technical like AI, what called the AGI or super intelligence is coming soon. So we can sense such that of intelligence, the mission come up. We all agree, like my colleague already discussed about, we all agree those all technical should be to the ethical prime. Otherwise, it's going to be, we cannot imagine to the consequences. So in that sense, but then when it comes to the ethical, it's a little problematic because my colleague already discussed about that. Disagreement, it's an agreement. So the best solution, in my view, is there's a wonderful offer His Holiness did is circular ethics, which is really kind of inclusive and universe as non-relevant certain religions and cultures, which is really wonderful. So what basically His Holiness is saying is there's two pillars most important. One pillar is we should know recognition of shared humanity, which means we all share reason why we should work together, because we all share to the same expression. We all want happiness, and as long as possible, we all don't want to any tiny bit of suffering. So that even including to the small insect, so that we share to the same kind of like humanity. And the other thing is we already discussed lots about interdependence, and also knowing the interdependence is so important. The people who are like top level should know to their well-being is dependent upon like us, like me even. It's somehow will get back to you. Whatever the make you did is consequence will become you. So these things. And the other thing is His Holiness wonderfully proposed 3 criterions that sort of whether certain kind of actions, whether that's ethical or non-ethical, which is the kind of a society or common sense. And then other one is the individual human experience, and also scientific finding for the beneficials. So the compassion is a great example, all this combines. When it comes to the scientific evidences, there's a lot of the evidence is showing all the beneficial of compassions, not only to the spiritual part, it's mental well-being, physical well-being, even in now talking about the business and the leadership. So, so we see there's foundations. So the question is, how can we apply those sort of ethical value into the society of AI? So I would suggest just 3 points. One is we could have two people who are creating those systems to learn more ethical values or to practice more compassion training or kind of this, which is really embodied ethical value into the development of AI systems. So the second one is, if I might understood lots of the professors, and what we get from AI is what we put into there and train it. So in the much of the material and the data that are available is, I think, is mostly West oriented and also dominant over the English languages. So we could infuse to other kind of like a contemplative material or compassion tradition culture of material to put into the AI systems. So the third one is most kind of like kind of exciting, but I don't know, which is really is we try to wisdom and ethical value emerge into the AI technical systems. And here's the one is the ideas contemplative AI. So here's the one of the new paper that's written by many scientists and producers and the contemplatives. You can see there's 3 pictures drawn wonderfully. And the first phase they draw is contemplative practice, which is we used in the 1,000 years ago. But the second one is neurophenomenology. So what's developed, many of you at here and the Mind Alive, and including a lot of neuroscientific investigation, and particularly integrate to the contemplative practice with the brain science. The third one is looks like we are going to and have soon sort of like a meditator of the kind of mission or something like that. But what I wish is is there some kind of a third kind of like, you know, the third phase of artificial intelligence with the first phase of a contemplative practice, something come up to very new sort of like technology or whatever you call, which is very useful for the humanity. The contemplative practice, and based on that papers, could be explained 2 ways. One way is their idea is to come up with a completely new architecture of AI that potentially can be contact more wisdom and the compassion into there. They call the active inference, which is to me is very exciting. But I don't know, it's very new research, and also not sure how it works. That's the thing. And other things, they're also suggesting trying to put the currently to the wisdom into the current architecture of AI, for example, large language model. So, but that it's the problem is even we try to put the ethical system into that models, but it seems like kind of like people who are reading to the monastery map as not living in the monasteries. So it's a little problematics. So the challenge it's this whole I think is a theme is we are like how to imbibing to compassion and the ethical value into the AI, because primarily, especially like tradition, the Buddhist tradition come up is compassion, all these things, experiential quality of the consciousness, which is only emerged from the embodied of mind, while AI is disembodied, come from computational product of the software or mathematical tools. So it's how can we reconcile those such different to knowledge together. So before we come such a dream kind of AI, which is I wish, but here's some of my suggestion too that can be practically beneficial. And one is many Buddhist practice are highly relevant for the creator and user and regulator, such as compassion training and mindfulness, we all know. Then other one is we should encourage to the AI users, like especially this morning, lots of discussion about the children and the families, to be aware or mindfulness to, kind of like too much attachment to the using or too much dependency on those AI tools, and even addict to kind of this. And lastly, to the monastic debate, and also yesterday or something talk about the philosophy of the school program, which is exactly in our monastic tradition, we're just doing the debate. It's it's a trying to kind of like something different idea come up. It's the goal is Sometimes even the local Indians very confused when the debate is so heated. Local Indian call like Jagra Puja, which Jagra means fighting. There's monks doing the fighting puja, which is it's not really fighting, but some of you see if you know very new, you can see the YouTube that's so heated and pushing each other. It's really physical kind of things, but really it's not trying to who is right, but it's trying to trying to the collaborative to knowing to understand something. Sometimes the challenger don't know and depender also don't know. When a question just come up and then trying to understand something emerge between to realization. So that sort of culture may be helpful, especially now the lots of the media is coming to the deep fake and then lots of the news. We have to careful to the kind of training to the analytical meditation. This is things. So that's almost. And maybe I would say the final point is, to me, is that despite the challenges so many, but my wish, or I'm kind of really optimistic that ethical value system combined with the AI come up to the really something really new kind of things. We cannot believe the potential of technologies, all these things come up something good for humanity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, all the presenters. For each of you are wonderful, insightful, the knowledge sharing here. And now we are going to have a 10 minutes break, and we will come in here after 10 minutes, and then we will do the panel discussion. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome back again here. So we are going to start our panel discussion. And from Sasha, your presentation, I think you present the holistic kind of implications of the AI, but the sustainable kind of balances with respect to the environmental sort of with respect to the environmental kind of balance and social kind of equity and economic viability. And also you said that based on some kind of research paper, when the Indian writers and American writers, and then compared to AI kind of authoring, and the comparison of the kind of the CO2 emission, and they are challenging that the AI is more ecologically kind of environmental friendly. And I think this one really resonates, the point that Keshitubdin Jimala made this morning. On certain level, it may look like very logical, but when you look at it from the different angle, in that kind of scenario, they miss the energy courses for the manufacturing and the training and the deployment with all of these things. So so the question to you is that, are there any current endeavors to create a more sustainable, beneficial AI that give you hope?
Yeah, and actually, when I initially quit my job, I was working at Morgan Stanley. I joined this collective called Climate Change AI. So now I think we're pretty much 6 years in, and it's a global community of AI practitioners who are trying to bridge the gap between. So what's interesting about climate change, it's not interesting. It's there's so many problems to solve. It's not like one single problem. There's electrification, there's climate modeling, there's biodiversity monitoring. There's all these communities working on all these different very important problems. And so Climate Change AI tries to bridge the gap between AI practitioners and all of these different communities and practitioners all over the world doing impactful work. And there's so much great things being done, and none of them use LLMs. Like, it's very, very specific, task-specific small models. My favorite example is this nonprofit called Rainforest Connection, and they take old cell phones and they connect solar panels on top of them, and they put them in the Amazon rainforest. And these phones have AI models, tiny AI models running inside the phones, powered by solar energy, and they listen to the rainforest. And then they can identify species, but they can also identify illegal logging. And if they hear a chainsaw or a truck, they send an alert with the GPS location, and a ranger will come and stop people because there's a lot of illegal logging in the Amazon. And they don't need any kind of big data, no big models, no huge amounts of energy or data centers, and they're making a huge, huge impact. And so there's lots of tiny solutions like this, and they're all using small models.
Then the second question, I think, goes to maybe specifically to Geshe Tabgela, or maybe you guys also can share your thoughts. As you said in your presentation, the AI system is more kind of computational, and the compassion is more kind of the experiential sort of the component or the element. And then you also talk about the possibilities of the AI, meditating and cultivating compassion. Therefore, I just, for me, sometimes, it is very, hard to digest, the AI system, having some kind of embody the compassion or something like that, Therefore, I want to hear, your thoughts or the collection, reflections on compassion, AI, and how it might work. And even if, AI, embodies some kind of compassion, what kind of benefit? What is its implication? Does AI go somewhere and teaches compassion, or it just kind of become AI itself more gentle, or I don't know.
So so in the traditional Buddhist point of view, the compassion it's a kind of inner value. It's very hard to digest to have some sort of models. And yesterday Peter mentioned the AI is only maybe can do simulation or even imitation or whatever. Emulation, whatever they use English terms. But even we cannot have a real science of compassion, what we are expecting really consciously. But we are trained to, at the base level, compassion culture. I really like to the idea of some of the American cities, compassion cities, the compassion gardens. We read of yesterday we come to the Kora, there's emptiness garden. So I kind of like to the culture to sort of, that's a positive kind of attitude. So which is in tradition, I think one of the mind training text is minutila tsigijang, which is even if you cannot get rid of negatives, try to use the word I'm not angry up or something like that, which is really to the fundamental level. Even you can try to do the positive word is just come up. So sort of that the idea. So but it's AI is really potential. We had to know. Sometimes I really like to the Carl Sagan's quote. He said I don't want to believe. I don't want to more understand. So I'm Buddhist. I kind of strongly believe there's no truly compassion AI. It's soon, but it's I still want to know more about that.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful ways to put it. The compassion, shifting in culture and in kind of amplifying, just giving us some kind of positive vibes or energy or kind of disseminating compassion mindset, and through that way. Then do you guys have any kind of thoughts on that, reflections on that, or okay. You want? Okay. Yes.
I was going to say just a short intervention. I think trying to understand, right? We said these systems are built with human decisions, right? So even with the best of intentions, we kind of need to also remember that these are statistical models, statistical systems that do not understand. Not only do they not feel pain, experience pain, but also they do not understand, they cannot reason through the context as well as consequences of what they are responding. And I want to give an example on this very quickly. Over the last 2 or 3 years now, there has been multiple suicides associated with extended engagement with large language models. I'm not going to name companies. But in one case, I think it was the last case, and the parents have a lawsuit with this company. The teen is saying, I want to commit suicide. And then the response from the LLM is, how can I help you write the suicide note? Not understanding what that means, what that teen is going through, what the consequences of a suicide note would be, what suicide means fundamentally, right? But there are associations, word associations between suicide, the word suicide, and the word or phrase suicide note. So if you're responding to it, it's very logical for that system to respond with, like, how can I help you? And since suicide note is associated with such context, like, I'll propose that to you to be helpful to you. Not understanding that, I think we need to look at both not feeling pain, but also not understanding the consequences, reasoning through the consequences.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a very deep question, and on my understanding, we've looked at two versions of the question of compassion. On one hand, there's the view that it supposes an inner life, something there that does the caring, and most of us are of the view that artificial intelligence doesn't have that. So, in one sense, compassion is out of bounds. On the other hand, we've spoken a lot about a compassionate point of view, which is one that could be taken by the people who are building the technology, which would involve, presumably, like trying to inculcate protocols that guard against, this kind of serious harm, which is in many ways antithetical to compassion. I guess one further question I have, which also comes up for the topic of empathy that we looked at yesterday, is even if AI systems cannot be compassionate because they lack this quality inside of themselves, is there something that is adjacent to compassion that just manifests in terms of behavior, which could be a useful imprint? So in some Western traditions, we say that love is like a feeling, it's an orientation, but it's also a way of conducting yourself in relation to other people. And you made the suggestion, you said, well, what would compassionate AI be like? Would it be gentler, I think was your example. And you can think of ways where gentleness manifests behaviorally, and maybe that is something that we could aspire towards without, making the really big, deep consciousness based.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, thank you. Then the third question to all of you, whoever want to answer this, okay. So how might we educate people about being participant in future of AI, and how do we organize toward this end? And are there any examples of this kind of education or organization going on already that we might build on?
So I can start with that,
Okay.
and I'll do a shameless plug to my organization. I'll give you two examples. But the first one is we provide free of charge AI policy clinics to engage more people, upskill more people to be in the conversations, to be in the rooms that shape the AI policies, AI regulations. So these are community advocates, lawyers, technologists, policy makers across 122 countries right now. And over the last 5 years, we trained more than 1,500 people across the world. As we speak, we're in the middle of our semester. We have another 350 going through our clinics. So that's one thing, just to get more community voices in the room, engaging with the policymakers and having that voice. I think the second piece is we talk about education and the children, etc. I strongly believe that not AI literacy, but digital literacy at large should be part of the primary school, secondary school curriculum, not wait until university. It should be part of the civic training, civic classes. In many countries, for example in the US, but many countries, there are civic classes where they tell you about what government is, what democratic values are, what are the separation of powers, etc. Right? So that can be in one of the a part of those courses because it fundamentally impacts how we look at each other, each other's humanity, each other's rights, democratic values at large. So it is a fundamental training as well.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So this is really, I also wanted to draw attention to Tabke's insight about the role of contemplative practice and the type of education we might endorse. And just over lunch, it occurred to me that it must be quite funny from a Buddhist perspective to hear Westerners talk about an attention economy. So we discovered that there was this thing called attention and that it really is important. But we discovered that about 15 years ago, whereas for Buddhists, the idea that attention is really important is clearly going to have been there for thousands of years. So I think given that, a lot of the question is how do we guide our attention wisely in relation to the technology? How do we prevent ourselves from being overwhelmed? I would strongly support your proposal that we start with some people who are real experts when it comes to attention.
Thank you. And I think, just to follow up, to that is also another question that, are there examples of collective actions to change the trajectory of the technology in the future? I think, we all talks about, the ethical kind of, the dimensions, and maybe in the future, is there any kind of, the examples, collective actions for that? I think that is also important to bringing. Yeah, anyone, any of you.
I think there's a lot of so typically I think what we've seen in the last years is that AI has been largely top down because of, mainly driven by money, but also data. So the companies that have the most money, the most data have been creating this AI that's been imposed upon us. But I think that now more and more we have bottom up collectives, things like indigenous AI and thinking about how to own data, how to own the technology and use it in a way that that works for the people who use it. And I think that increasingly this is important because right now we have also, for example, open source AI. So we can download models, adapt models, and we don't need to be using. So typically most of the AI that we currently interact with, I think statistically speaking, is black box models, right? ChatGPT, Gemini, what have you. We don't know what's in them. But if we start doing AI that's both bottom up and open source, we can start kind of opening the boxes and making the boxes in a way that works for people using them. And I guess I'm a little naive in the sense that for me, open source is really important, just as a way of owning technology and of opening and looking at the code and looking at the data and understanding in a way that you can't do when you're using commercial AI systems.
And maybe I shared some examples in the presentation in terms of some of the industries that we already regulated. We already put with collective action, we contain some of the risks, harms, consequences, and etc. But specifically for AI, there are now multiple countries that have AI legislation that provides that continue to provide protections to citizens and consumers. In the US, maybe the federal government is moving slower than we would like, but there are a lot of grassroots conversations happening, collective action happening at state level. California, not only California, but states like Republican states such as Utah, Texas, etc., coming up with AI-specific legislation or passed AI-specific legislation to protect their constituencies. And that only happens because there's collective action, grassroots actions in those states that are knocking on the doors of the policymakers saying, we don't want to be negatively impacted, we are feeling this, we are feeling the externalities, we want protections. And when they feel that heat, when they see not individuals, but collective action in front of them, then becomes an issue of hey, this is going to impact who's going to vote for me, how they're going to vote for me, right? So there's a lot of action. And a good example is recently in Phoenix, Arizona, collective action resulted in veto of a data center construction, right? So now they are working with different cities, counties, etc., on how they move that forward, the action move. So there are examples that we can build upon. So it's like I said, we can change the shape, the trajectories.
Okay, then maybe, I'll ask a specific question to Gishi Tabkela, maybe, the AI, is some kind of, speeding up everything, all the, outward kind of, the task, done in a very short span of time, accelerating everything. And the Buddhist teaching also talks about the inner kind of, the advance from the tantric parts, from the tantric kind of, the practice, when you, improve your kind of spiritual sort of, the dimension, and enhance your kind of spiritual practice, and channelizing all the energy, into some sort of more kind of, subtle sort of energy. So that speeds up for the spiritual practitioners to accomplish lots of, their spiritual progression and achievement. So there is a, one that is more kind of oriented to speeding up inner kind of flourishing, and then the AI is more kind of an outward sort of oriented. So what do you, what is the implication and its significance in terms of, Buddhist? I just wanted to, bring that, to here in the audience.
Actually, I did ask the request to him, don't make a hard question. Otherwise, I won't pay your tea, and afterward, but he did anyway. So, so the sort of like, sometimes in Buddhist tantric tradition, there's if I could say a little bit sort of fantasizing, or it's really there. For example, of the sixth Naropa yoga, it's a very kind of like, there's a lot of the kind of, miracle sort of like technique, what we call the heat energy and dream yoga. Those things it's not only talking about, actually there's a really, if we really can go, there's a really deep philosophy, and behind there's a method to, if you properly to practice. But sometimes people use a little bit kind of fantasizing ways. So when we, I remember when we first time when we receiving to the teaching of the science, and then the physics, my physics professor says, and the light is the farthest thing in the ever income in the universe. And then one of our students, no, professor, the mind is the farthest, can go much faster than light. And then I can go some else, what a pure land, thinking in dream or something like that. So it's not like it's a story, but there is some sort of, if you, but rarely achieve those sort of, things. But it's their way. What is I would just saying, like in the Buddhist notion, we have a mind, they have a gross mind, and then the subtle mind, and the subtlest mind is sort of that, which is just lighting down. We don't use right now. If you know how to use that technique, which is faster, it's sort of like maybe very speed, kind of like the AI is, this morning or something mentioned, one of the best kind of like AI or computer can do is fast. That's the, sort of that also like in the why we tantric is sometimes describing it's better than some sort of like other traditions, because tantric, there's a really fast way to achieve something, like those, whatever the call, this something achievement. But there's idea, and there's a deep down, and there's a really truly practitioners there, but I'm not that capable to kind of describing this. And also it's just kind of, I don't know how we put it there.
Okay, and then one question, I think, or maybe, another one question. So my question also is, in this, previous presentations, and also in your kind of, talk, the agency, you see the AI, in the future, the possibility of, AI to advance, to extend, becoming fully automated. And from Buddhist perspective, when AI becomes in that kind of, the advancement, AI does not have any kind of mental component, the experiential and all these things. It is absence of the ignorance, the samsaric, from the Buddhist perspective, ignorance is the everything. That is the kind of the karmic force behind some kind of all the or activities. And when AI becomes fully automated and it's doing mass kind of catastrophic sort of the destruction, then who will be the who will take the more accountability or responsibility? And from the Buddhist perspective, maybe what are the they are just kind of in a machine, and doing everything what women can do, and there is no karmic sort of the forces. Then who is kind of is it a kind of accelerations of the the karmic forces or what? So yeah.
I have strong opinions. I think that the current narrative around AGI and superintelligence is a bit of like a magic trick. It's like I don't know if you're familiar with the Wizard of Oz. It's like we have this big head and it's impressive and it does all this cool stuff, but there's actually someone hiding in a room. But we're putting all the focus on this big head and all the cool stuff that it can do. And I think that especially the discourse from the developers of especially large language models, calling them superintelligence and emphasizing the catastrophic risks, makes us forget the very tangible current risks, not even risks, impacts actually. So the current things that are happening because we're so focalized on this agentic, catastrophic, existential risk in the future. And I think that that's done on purpose so that our reptilian brain kicks in to some extent, and then we get overwhelmed with this, like, what happens, who takes accountability. And actually, when we're talking about superintelligence or agency, that means that nobody, like no company, no organization takes accountability because this thing is super intelligence. How can you take accountability for something that's smarter than you, right? And I think that by trying to anchor things in very concrete, like biases, like even now, for example, there are facial recognition systems that we know have racial bias, that we know misidentify people of color, and then they're being sold and used in police precincts and justice systems around the world, but notably in the United States. And there's no accountability on this very, very concrete thing that is, tangible. And so I think that we have to start enforcing accountability on things like this. So a company that makes these kinds of tools has to face potential legal action if their tools malfunction. And then by starting to create precedents, to creating laws, creating legislation, then we can think about, agency or superintelligence. But I think we have to start very concrete.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. Maybe do we have more time or no? Okay, so thank you so much your discussions and answer these questions. I think it is very entertaining and educating. So now we open for the Q&A session to the audiences, please.
Thank you, Geshe Sangpola. Thank you all for this discussion. And now we have more time. Let's start with Francesco because I left you out in the previous round, and then I see Jimpala and Geshe-la and others around. Okay, I noticed all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to everybody. Yes, I would like to start by creating a bridge with the previous...
Francesco, may you stand?
Yeah, sorry.
So that the audience can see you as well.
Hello, everybody. I would like to start by creating a bridge with the previous panel. And we spoke about narratives. There are, of course, like utopian narratives, dystopian narratives. There can also be denialist narratives. And I would like to apply this reflection about one possibility that some people are considering, that namely the hypothesis that we are going toward a post-labor or post-work society. That is the idea that most of the physical and intellectual jobs in a few decades will be done maybe not better, but surely much more quickly and cheaply by the combination of AI and robotics. And in such a way that unless we don't want to introduce very severe regulations, but this would be against the very idea of free market, people will simply be hired less and less. along the years. So this idea, I would like to know your opinions, your ideas. Is it a narrative? Is it just a narrative, or is it something that can really happen in the future? And it doesn't matter if it is like in 50 years from now, because I think that it would affect so deeply. That it will be a transformation of society so difficult that it is worth start thinking about it in advance. And this is also something that maybe is relevant for this context, because the contemplative practices and values and perspectives could be useful in facing the difficulty of a humanity that find itself without a meaning, a purpose. And what do you think about this? I'm addressing to everybody wants to.
Okay, I feel like people are looking at me, so I will volunteer for a hard question. Thank you so much. So your question makes me immediately wish we had become a bit clearer about what we mean when we say something is a narrative earlier on. So given that we didn't define it, I will present my own interpretation. So I think when we say something is a narrative, we mean that it's a story, which doesn't mean it's frivolous, but it's a sense-making structure that we use to join up a view of the world. And some narratives can be completely fictional, others can be grounded in reality. And I think that with regards to automation, it isn't just a narrative. Like people who are invested in understanding these things, for example, economists, they have real theories that they can show you, right? Where they will say, look, a job is composed of a set of tasks. A more general artificial intelligent agent can do more tasks. Therefore, it looks like you might have a substitution effect, which would lead to these outcomes. Now, of course, we then encounter the fact that even a theory is a simplification, right? And a theory has assumptions embedded in it. So there's many reasons to doubt that that is true, right? But it is also, it's one joined up kind of account of why things might happen. And for that reason, I think it's quite important to take it seriously, right? Like even if it doesn't happen, it doesn't seem to me a huge mistake to be prepared for these different worlds. And, you know, I guess the final thing I would say on this very big topic is, of course, you know, as we've said many times, although there are structural forces at work, nothing is predetermined, right? So it's actually by thinking through these questions, you know, where are the points of resistance? Where would we actually like to steer it in one direction rather than another? That we can potentially nudge things in the direction of a world that we could collectively endorse. But it's a very, very difficult topic, and I myself do not have a firm view about how things will play out. Does anyone else have views on this they want to share?
That and just building on what you said about tasks, like we tend to talk about jobs as like this like uniform concept, but it is actually the tasks that are composed that build up that job. That if you're a truck driver, you're not only, for example, driving the truck, but you're handling a lot of the loading, unloading papers, custom papers. If the tire goes flat, you're changing that. So there are a lot of tasks that make up that job, right? So we're talking about a lot of the economic studies that focus on that task level, like International Labor Associations is one, World Banks is another, looking at what tasks might be automated, what tasks might be augmented, and what will be the impact on task level and on jobs. I would suggest also looking at Daron Acemoglu's and other Nobel laureates' work on what that means. Like, are we losing a lot of jobs? Are we creating some? And what happens between that transition, right? So as technologies are embedded into our businesses, into our society, there are also some job creation, right, to monitor these systems, but it might not be equal to the speed that change happens between elimination, augmentation, and creation. So he talks about that transition period that is as more the painful part than the ultimate result.
Geshe-Molla.
My name is Dr. Gishi Malam, and I'm the director of Malam IT Research Center. So we created the AI translation, voice recognition, or LLMs. So we have got much problem. This problem is language problem. For example, in Tibetan language, for example, our dog, very sadness or suffering, maybe dying at the roadside. Then somebody call, look like that. Then Tibetan language, automatic, kantas. That voice automatically, the output, the feeling, the compassion, respect, so automatically, very easily. But we translate it to English. We can never, ever. That is not problem. The AI, it's different language. So I have many friends, Western peoples. Then we show the image. Then say, "Oh my God, sadness," like that. So the language is very different. So how can we, the language is very important, the human or AI, whatever. So the language is very different. So I question to you, how can we at the same, and to the outsource, at the same level of the emotion, the compassion is the emotion level. So yeah, my question is that. Thank you. Yeah.
So since I don't have a background of the technologies, even I'm talking about it because I'm just really talking about my teachers taught me. So I'm not really living in the AI. I'm just kind of that. But it's a Geshe Tubden Jebula mentions, it's really true for the languages that we have experienced. To people who, like the Tibetan who are born in the US, even they're speaking Tibetans, and then they comes to the subtle kind of like to the situations, the feeling is very different. And I totally agree to the, it's a, there used to be classical people thinking language is only just translating. No, language shapes to the mind, to the create, to the emotions. So here's the one, sorry, my talk is going. So that one of these most doubtful, that's when we're talking about the, like, even though I'm really hopeful to AI is some sort of very, like the contemplative AI or meditation AI, compassion AI, some sort of would expect to come. But when it comes to like some sort of mind, like non-conceptual think, how can we build that AI model is hugely relevant to the language and thought? And how can we build it with the conceptual mind? That is the question. Even language, it's Geshe Malam already he knows, you knows better than, but even languages, within different languages, there's a background of sense of knowledges. So one of the worst things I will tell to the Western professor come to monastery to teach science, the worst thing is they feel things when they're making joke, none of them laughing. Because the joke is not working because the language matters. But sometimes monks are loving because translator says should love. Because this is a joke. So see that how the language is, it's very hard to, even though symbol we thought it's just translating, it's not translating. They really deep, and I totally agree, but I don't have a solution. So it's, yeah, you know better than, and then anyone
Can I
maybe
add
have
something?
but
I've been working, so I have a bachelor's in linguistics. I'm like Dr. Bender, I don't have a PhD, but I did do some linguistic studies, and I've always worked in language technologies, and it was never like a cool application of AI. Until a couple of years ago, people were mostly focused on self-driving cars and image, like computer vision was called. And now I see all these people working on large language models and creating these technologies that have such power in the world that will make some decisions, predictions, etc. And they have absolutely no linguistic knowledge. And it shocks me because, we study things like the symbol grounding problem, which means that, it's not just a word, it's grounded in a concept, in a reality. And then I hear people who are just computer scientists who say, well, yeah, LLMs, you just, you'll plug them into a sensor and they'll be able to interact with the external world based on the readings that they're getting from that sensor. Like, for example, plug an LLM to a robotic hand will pick up an object. The LLM will be able to reason based on absolutely nothing at all, that object is heavy or light or soft or whatever. And for me, it's like, no, there's the symbol grounding problem is lacking in this. And I think that it all comes down to interdisciplinarity, and we're not good at that. And most of the the organizations creating these systems don't have the necessary components. It's mostly computer scientists, mostly like engineers, and there's not enough linguists, there's not enough cognitive scientists, translators, experts from, even anthropology, sociology, history, philosophy. We need more people like that around the table so that, especially like, our topic is diversity. We need more diversity so that when the decisions are made, like it's often when I talk to people who are computer scientists, it's like, it's so simple. You'll just, take the data from here and it's going to work. But then when you start talking a philosopher or a historian, they're like, no, but you have to be thinking about how you're getting the data and what it represents, et cetera, the source, the veracity. And I think that we need more of that complexity. But it also means that we'll move slower. And I think that in the current age of AI, that's seen as a disadvantage. And so somehow we need to find a way to do this diversity and this complexity and this dialogue in a way that's not completely against the current of go faster.
Jimpala, and then you.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful panel, and also very encouraged to hear about all the solutions that are being proposed, the policy advice, workshop for the AI policy, and also the climate kind of, dimension, and looking more in a interconnected way, all of this. So my question is really more to Yersin in relation to Kitapke's presentation. Yersin, you proposed 3 ways of getting to the values. One is consensus, the second is what was the second one? Second one was democratic process, and third one was this veil of ignorance, kind of the experiment. And the language of value can also be very polarizing, because especially, for example, in the US, I know parents hate school teachers imposing their values on kids. So this is one very contested area. So, but on the other hand, there is a kind of a yearning on the part of those who care about future of the world and care about the potential dangers of technology that is unrestrained, that somehow values need to be brought in. So in this kind of dilemma, looking at the 3 process, can you envision thinking of Tapkela's proposal that His Holiness is secular ethics, the universal approach to ethics might be a kind of a solution, or at least a kind of a route. So do you envision in this 3-stage process, eventually what is discovered from this veil of ignorance process to be then matched up with consensuals, one on the top, in which case then you will have some kind of at least a more universality?
Yes, thank you so much. A very deep and profound question. So I think ultimately, as people who live with technologies, something like a thought experiment can only really provide you with ideas that you then discuss and you endorse or reflect and you endorse or reject together. So, even if we have ideas about what the deeper nature of a moral agreement would look like, we normally have to actually explore to find out whether we have the common ground there. And I think a related point is I don't want to try and make the whole, I don't think the whole space of AI needs to be covered by uniform values, right? Like very often it will be a matter of personal value or community value. And an exploration of a community's values may be quite different from an exploration of cross-cultural values. And in my mind, when we come to these agreements about how we want to live together, we should allow for this kind of differentiation. So I don't want to say, only secular ethics and it looks like this, or even to put it forwards as an idea, because really my vision is implicitly that there would be different levels and communities, and sometimes we need big common ground, and sometimes we can just, peacefully coexist in our own space. Do you have further reflections, Tabke?
Then we would go with this gentleman here, and then I saw you as well next to her.
I wanted to thank Sasha. So in this event, we've largely been talking about the mind, and you took some time to bring things down to earth and kind of give a little speech for Mother Earth. So my comment question is along that line. So 10 years ago, as part of big tech industry, we were really proud to begin making promises to the world and documenting them to the world that we would run on 100% renewable energy. And most companies made really good progress, and many fulfilled that promise. Now, since that time, over a 10-year period, big data, the definition of big data centers are now 50x bigger. Now, to put into perspective what that means, each data center could use the power and water of over 1 million households, Western households. Mm-hmm. And so what we found over the past couple years, language subtly changes. And it subtly changes from, we promise to use 100% renewable energy, to we promise to be carbon neutral. Mm-hmm. And the reason that's being is the grid cannot support the energy growth. And so nuclear power plants that were intended to be shut down, which by the way are carbon neutral, are being extended in operation. Nuclear power plants that were shut down are being recommissioned, and new technology, highly distributed micro-nuclear power plants, which when we look at where we're growing the cloud or AI, could put a highly distributed nuclear infrastructure within 50 miles of the majority of humans on Earth. So I'm just interested in the panel's feelings on the trade-off between my daughter's generation of 100%, carbon neutral, climate change, to some of our generation of nuclear power is the biggest risk on this planet. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that even nuclear. So recently there was this really interesting report that essentially looked at the way that data centers use energy. And the problem is that on the one hand, it's a lot of energy, as you say, but it's also very variable because it depends on, it's like, so the way we use energy as humans in our houses, in our offices is pretty predictable. And there's pretty good models that exist, like energy grid operators, they will use AI or statistics to some extent to predict, at night, people tend to use less energy than during the day, in offices during the day, and like people will, do their laundry on Sundays. And we have these pretty good models. With data centers, none of the models work, and the peaks are huge and the drops are huge. And so, for example, even I think it was last summer, there was kind of last winter, there was a cold snap, and then the people needed more energy in certain regions, and then there were data centers as well, and they almost created a full grid blackout just because the energy demands went up so much. And essentially this means that we have to have very responsive energy sources, which is why we're using mostly natural gas, to some extent coal, to some extent, essentially sources where you can just add more X and get more energy. And this is why renewables are really hard to use in data centers, because you can't just put more sun, you can't just put more wind. They're usually pretty flat, or they're variable based on weather patterns, etc. And nuclear actually is inherently incompatible with data centers because it has a very stable output. And so for me, sure, it can be part of the solution, but it's never going to be the 100% solution. And these small modular reactors are yet another strategy to tell us that the solution is there. Like it's going to happen. We're going to have a data center. We're going to have a baby nuclear reactor, and they're going to coexist together and there's nothing to be seen here. But in the meantime, most of the energy used for data centers is not even nuclear, not even renewable. It's natural gas. And you mentioned nuclear reactors being kept connected to the grid. Well, we actually have coal power plants that are being kept longer, and countries and states that are deciding to keep coal as part of the mix because of data centers. So I think that it's definitely a clash. And currently, what we see is a regression with regards to any environmental protection laws, not only in the U.S. but around the world, because of this insistence on we need to grow, we need to keep building data centers, we can't be left behind, and so that really makes me sad, essentially.
Tim, please. Is
Thank
there
you.
a hand back there? Okay, later.
Thank you to the panelists and for Mind and Life for this thoughtful dialogue. Curious, I hate to keep bringing up late stage capitalism. Thanks, Jack. But given the embedded context of this discussion, that there's a lot of demands on these companies, both from the people who want these technologies, from the shareholders, from the economy at large, to produce these models and to put them out as quickly as possible. I'm just curious, and Jason, maybe you could speak to some of this from your personal experience than anyone else, thinking about the backdrop inside of the companies for receiving ethical debates, dialogues. Where does it fit in the priority stack? And how does it align with the goals of the companies and their shareholders and kind of their top-down mandates for how they do business in the context of capitalism today?
Okay, thank you. I can see people like saving the hard questions for me, so appreciated. Yeah, so it's a very challenging topic. I think Merve did a wonderful illustration earlier of how sometimes the competitive dynamics lead to suboptimal outcomes. And then the question is, what can you do to forestall that from happening, given where we are? So of course, there's the big levers. So like when you use regulation or the law, you can shape market outcomes in very profound ways, set standards that technologists and technology companies need to adhere to. But I actually think that when technologies are being developed very quickly, you also need to kind of actively try and steer the direction ahead of time. And in terms of things that I've noticed, I think at the moment when research is still an idea or before it's encountered the world, there's often a moment where there's quite a lot of indeterminacy, and even the people who are building it haven't really had a chance to reflect, like on, I often ask this question, what does good look like? Not just what is possible, but where is the real value that you want to unlock here? And, I think in the context of technology studies, people sometimes talk about this, what they call Collingridge's dilemma, which is early on you can shape, outcomes, but it's hard to know what will happen. Later, when you know what the problems are, path dependencies have set in. So I think we need to work on both interfaces. And I guess the thing that I'd add on top of the framework you presented is just to say that in my experience, often there is this window of opportunity to engage people ahead of time. And, with a discourse like this, that's kind of why I believe we should have these conversations about values that span, years and decades, so that there is a kind of a demand and a North Star that is made of the people who are running corporations and building technologies, that they themselves orientate towards those kind of goals. For example, climate goals, things like that.
Before two questions from the audience, let's read a question that was filed in Tibetan. So Geshe Sengpula, you may translate that question.
Yes. So we have a questions from Geshe Temba. And if we, encode the values to the AI, or the kind of emotional kind of the components like assignments, and then the sadness, if we encode all of this kind of into AI, it surely it possibly have some kind of negative impacts on young generations, their educational growth and their kind of ethical and morality. So who will be the responsible for this? And do you think is it important to have some kind of regulation board on the international level? And that's the question.
I'll go. Actually, on the international, I'll start with the last one and maybe pass the value alignment piece to one of you. At the international level, actually, there has been a lot of consensus. Not only recently, but building up since 2016. One of the most important, or two of the most important one was 2021, 193 countries, members of UNESCO, actually committed to what we called UNESCO Recommendation on Ethics of AI, saying we want AI technologies to be built by these guiding principles. And a couple of applications of AI, one is mass surveillance, and the second one is social scoring, should be prohibited because they're fundamentally in conflict with human rights and human dignity. So it's a very extensive document, and if you think of 193 countries coming to an agreement on that, it is quite phenomenal. But then there is also the first international convention, treaty on AI. Some of you might not have heard it. It is relatively going under the radar, mostly overwhelmed by EU AI Act. But Council of Europe, which has 46 member states, so it's a totally separate institution from European Union, and it has members from all the continents. We've been working, my organization was an observer, expert contributing to the drafting of that convention. Spent 4.5 years, word by word drafting, and then last September that was concluded, and we currently have 43 countries who have endorsed this. So there is an actual convention on AI that protects, that prioritizes fundamental rights, democratic values, and rule of law. And there is a commitment to actually implement that. We just need more countries to endorse it and then move on to the implementation piece.
Thank you. Two quick questions, Kate and Rip.
Thank you. Yeah, it's on. Yeah, I was super pleased to see Hans Jonas mentioned because I think he's such a relevant philosopher for this moment. And I just like one part of his philosophy is the sense of responsibility that humans have, but the other flip side of that is the sense of value that all life has. And he has this very beautiful idea that only life can know life. So in terms of thinking about how to think about what kind of values we incorporate into these systems and the kind of processes you spoke about for how we could think of, Yasin in particular, I was wondering what you thought about how we think about the idea that there are other values in the world beyond the human that we might want to incorporate too, because, for example, those three sorts of processes that you spoke about don't necessarily seem to have room for incorporating non-human values in their own right. But I was sort of wondering what you thought about that, and also like what the Buddhist perspective would be on the idea that there is value in the non-human world as well. But thank you.
Thank you. Very quick answer and final very quick question, because we need to leave.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think to include non-human life and people who've not been born and things like that in our understanding of what this new, more expansive global ethics looks like does require imagination and invention, but it may be slightly different from what I presented here. So I think one thing that people now think is that we could have stakeholders or representatives who try to speak on behalf of, say, future generations. So some parliaments have already experimented with that idea. And similarly, in political theory, people have actually spoken about representatives speaking on behalf of animals and the environment and things like that. So within the limited time, that's the kind of direction I would gesture in, this kind of fuller representation of affected parties.
Thank you. A quick remark.
That's the different. What I'm talking about, the material available to put in AI. So which is in the Buddhist theory is that non-human is definitely to count of the value. So that's the different that Dhanjamala mentioned of the sentient being is the beyond the human beings, including to the inside. All this thing is according to Buddhist belief, it's all have an equal right. So that's my goal is essentially we should include a lot of values that missing data into the current AI system. So we should count those. It's also good for the diversity. So that.
Thank you. Final question, Reep.
Okay. Real quickly, and thank you for this. This has been wonderful. But real quickly, what I understand is that the companies, right, especially the big folks, have been resistant to regulation. So if the goal is to do no harm, and the companies who are building this are the most knowledgeable about what's working and what's not and what the dangers are, why can't we get the CEOs to actually create the regulation for the good guys and keep the bad guys from harming us, right? And because you are the most knowledgeable about what the facts are and how to regulate your own business. But I understand there's been big resistance to that. So I'm curious as to what that might be going forward.
So I think the question is directed to me, but Sasha may also have a quick contribution to make. So I guess from my perspective, CEOs don't make regulation, and it wouldn't be appropriate for them to do so. That's what we have parliaments and empowered legislatures for. Now, of course, it's very important that they can do their jobs with integrity, and we should endeavor to build political systems that have that kind of guard in place. I do agree with the point about information asymmetries, and for that reason, I think that we have a duty basically to share information as soon as it arises. And in terms of these kinds of conversations and the research publications we do, they're often geared towards that purpose.
And I think that when we're thinking about regulating, we should be first and foremost regulating transparency. So I don't think that as a society, we're at the point of saying, we can have AI systems that do X, Y, and Z. We can try, but I think that we should be saying is we have to have this and this and this information, because based on this information, one country could say, okay, this is an acceptable system given our values, given our laws, given whatever, given our climate commitments. And another country might say this is not acceptable. And I think that instead of going back and forth, like there's a lot of debate about, I don't know, whatever, image generation and misinformation, we should be like, okay, if you are creating this kind of system, here is all the information that you have to provide, and then as Yasan said, the governments will make the laws.
Thank you. Thank you, Geshe Sangpola, for facilitating this panel, and thank you all for sharing your knowledge, and thank you for the questions.